All right, thank you everyone for joining the Thrive Performance Group's webinar series. I'm Grant Wash, and I'll be introducing our esteemed colleague, Becca Pearce. But before I do that, I want to tell those who maybe don't know much about Thrive a little bit about the organization. Thrive was founded last year. The idea behind it was to bring seasoned professionals in different areas of expertise under one roof in order to be able to share our expertise with small, mid-sized businesses across the country, and especially here in Baltimore. And so we've got a collection of all kinds of different professionals that are here anytime you need. Feel free to reach out to any of us or Thrive. You can see the Thrive Performance Group website and send us a message, and we'd be happy to chat and share our knowledge and see how we can help, especially in these times of change. With that said, let me introduce Becca Pearce. And real quick, I just want to let everyone know this is being recorded so that we can share it after the presentation to anyone that was here live or that wasn't able to join us. So we're lucky to have Becca Pearce here. She's a highly skilled and experienced executive. She spent most of her career in leadership positions within the healthcare industry, health insurance to be specific. In 2011, she was chosen by Governor O'Malley to run the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange. She served the state of Maryland for 2 years before returning to the commercial market as a VP within the University of Maryland medical system. In 2016, after surviving and recovering from a brain tumor, she left the corporate world to run an executive coaching firm, Extend. Now dedicated to helping others in charge, she works with all size companies and businesses to make their leaders more confident, their teams more productive, and their companies grow faster. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Becca to talk about cost savings in this time of change.
Thanks, Grant. It's nice to be here today. I appreciate the invitation. What I want to do is just spend about 15 minutes talking about some cost-cutting pieces, and then I think we open it up for questions. So I want to start with an understanding of what's going on in our brains right now. So our brains react to potential threats in 3 different ways. So if you look at the threat levels of 1, 2, and 3, level 1 is you're aware, right? If we're going to put everything in the COVID-19 situation, right? This is when it was in China, right? It's a news story. We're aware of it. We're not really paying attention to it. It doesn't really have any impact on us. Level 2 is, okay, COVID-19 is in the United States. Still not really impacting me, but I'm at least alert and I'm focused on it and I'm thinking about what the potential impact may be. In the 3rd level, this is, okay, now it's in Maryland. The governor has shut down all non-essential businesses. Things are looking a little bit differently than I really expected them to. Your brain has immediately gone at this point into fight or flight. Your amygdala, the part of the brain that actually impacts your fight or flight, is actually transformed the way that your body is reacting to things, and it has turned off your thinking part of your brain. And what it's actually done is moved all of the energy to other parts of your body. And so the difficult thing about fight or flight is you can't actually function in this space for very long. So you'll see there in the middle, our goal is to be at 2 and 2 in both of those situations. From a reaction perspective, we have underreaction going to overreaction, right? Underreaction looks a little bit like, this is not a big deal. This isn't going to impact me. What's everybody talking about? And the overreaction looks a little bit like the toilet paper aisle. Overreaction from a business perspective may be, a panic reaction of laying everybody off within hours of the governor's announcement. So our goal is to get both of our threat level down to level 2 and our reaction to level 2. And I'll tell you why that balance piece is really important. And so the other interesting thing to note in all of this is that you actually have a choice on how you're going to react to this. Once there's a recognition that fight or flight is kicking in, you have the ability to move yourself back to level 2, and you have a choice of how you're going to manage it. So Harvard Business School did a study in 2010, which I think is really interesting. it did a study on who makes it through a recession. And they looked at companies through several past recessions, not just the one in 2007 and 2008. And what they found was that companies that cut costs faster and deeper had the lowest probability of pulling ahead of the competition when things turn around. I'm going to repeat that. So the people that cut the costs faster and deeper did worse than companies who didn't make those drastic changes. And the opposite is also true. Companies that didn't make any changes also didn't fare well. So what you'll see is that the balance is really what's most important. Cutting costs strategically while also focusing and investing on tomorrow is really where you need to be. And so one of the ways to do that is to really just retrenching yourself in your values and where you want to be in the long term. So I want everybody to close their eyes for a minute and just think about, okay, it's 6 months from now. I'm in my business. Where do you want to be? Who do you want standing with you? What do you want to be able to do? How do you want to remember this time? This is a very difficult time for all of us. We have a choice in how we want to react. How do we want to remember this time? And the most important question is really interesting. What is my opportunity? That's a difficult question for us to ask in this time of need for so many people, but there's opportunity. What is your company going to look like? So as we sit and think through those questions, that's where your ability, only you are going to know how to cut costs within your company. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the costs that most companies have, and we're going to take into consideration, what are the impacts of these things from a financial, personal, and growth perspective. We want to look at the potential help and support you have out there because you are not in this alone. And we want to identify the relationships you have. There are a cadre of people that you work with on a regular basis that are here to help you. And so what I can do as a business, what I will tell you is that cutting costs is not cut and dry. What I will tell you as a business coach, that it's my job to ask you questions that will help you think that through. And so that's what we're going to do today. So for each of these, I'm going to go through and you'll see what the cost is, what the considerations are, what support you might have, and what relationships you already have or may need to create to be able to support this. So for rent and utilities, one of the things you need to think about is, am I going to stay here long term? Is this something that I just need to sustain and figure out how I'm going to get through 6 months, or am I going to leave here long term? And that's maybe the financial analysis that maybe you need to be thinking about right now. From a support perspective, I do know that commercial real estate companies, I have heard of several of them who are forgiving rent, or forgiving fees. Maybe your landlord can negotiate the utilities with you. So there are just ways that you can be looking through this. And I think as we go through each one of these, the most important thing that you should recognize is that nothing is cut and dry. Do your research. Try and figure out what avenues are available to you before you make your final decision. So from an insurance perspective, this is a big line item for a lot of people. What happens if I drop it? Can I take that risk? Can I get back in? Like, is there underwriting to get back in? And what happens to my employees? So these are things that you really need to take a look at. I do know from a support first perspective, for example, Care First is holding premium payments for the next 3 months. Shifting coverage might be an option as well. Talking to your insurer from a property and casualty perspective. For a restaurant, for example, do you need to cover your delivery people now? Okay, so maybe that's new insurance that you need to be putting in place, but maybe you can shift your coverage from something else so it's not an additional cost, but you're just covering the appropriate places now. From the equipment and business tools perspective, this is super important when you think about your future. What do I need now to run my business when I'm back up to full speed? So, for example, if you're going to need to reach out to your customers and part of your new plan relies on a CRM and making sure your consumer relationships are really strong, I think maybe I wouldn't cut my CRM discussion right now. I wouldn't pull that out. So you really need to think about where you want to be in the long term before you make those slashes. From a supplies perspective, I do want to spend a little bit of time on this. Obviously, everybody buys supplies. This is a variable cost, right? Everybody buys supplies for their companies. And you're going to have a totally different run rate for this period than you normally do. It could be higher for some people, but for many people, it's probably lower. So what is it that you can do to limit your usage? And here's the interesting thing about this is that you may be your biggest limiting factor when you think about this, because as a business owner, as a leader within an organization, we have a tendency to believe that we have to offer so many things for our customers. But what I'm thinking is that maybe you're not realizing that there are decreased expectations in the market. So I can tell you that I'm a loyal customer of a restaurant. I can tell you that if they did not serve my meal, it's not like I would stop going there. I would just say, oh, I'm going to absolutely help you get through what you need to. I'm a loyal customer. I'm going to stick with it. So you need to really be looking at your data. What's your market demand? What's your biggest seller? What can you be actually doing to make sure that your run rate is where you need to be to get through this time? From a continuing growth perspective, I have been many places that this becomes the first line item to cut, right? So this is, education, things that you can be doing to expand either your business or expand your learning potential for as a leader. What I will tell you is that I urge you for it not to be the place that you cut, and not just because coach ends up at the bottom. It is not a place to cut because most successful companies have someone to lean on. This is where you're going to glean the most support right now. And so it's really important for you to continue the relationships that you have. Keep those relationships. If you have a consultant that comes and helps you on a regular basis, make sure you're tapping into them. Free webinars. We are not the only free webinar that's out there. There are free webinars probably every hour of at least 3 days a week, right? So make sure you're tapping into all of the resources that you need and keeping those strong relationships. And finally, from a payroll and personnel perspective, this is absolutely the biggest line item from all companies, maybe not all, but most companies, I'd say 90%. So a panic response looks something like a friend of mine who literally did get laid off within hours of the communication on March 23rd. But what I caution you against in doing your layoffs is your ramp up time. You need to think about how long, God, everybody knows how long it takes to hire somebody, right? And imagine, it's not like everybody's just going to be sitting there and ready to jump back on board. If you lay people off, you need to think about, are those people going to actually want to come back and work for me? And strategically, if you have any employees that have a direct impact on your success, laying them off just adds oil to a fire. So you really need to think about what you can be doing. And the support here is so astronomical. There's so much out there to help you with this that thinking about laying people off as your first cut is really going to harm you in the long run. And I want to spend some time going through the summary of the government programs. And let me be clear that I am not an expert on this. I am not a CPA. I'm not your banker. I am not your financial analyst. But what I did do was pull together all of the information that I have seen recently on the program. So there are a slew of programs out there, both from local and federal governments. Depending on your company size, it goes from sole proprietor up to 500 people, depending on whether it's federal or state. And many are covering the expenses we just talked about: payroll, insurance, mortgage, rent, utilities, your operational expenses. The purpose of these programs is to keep you in business and to make sure that you're able to keep as many people as employed as possible. So the number one thing you should be doing when you look at this is reaching out to one of your contacts, whether most likely your banker for this, because they're going to be your conduit and your starting point. And so we go back to, what are your guiding principles? When you're thinking about all of this again, if you think about one big takeaway from this, I want it to be, what are your guiding principles as a leader within your organization? Where do you want to be? Who do you want standing with you? What do you want to be able to do? How do you want to remember this? And what's my opportunity? This is what's going to guide you through your tough decision making. And I work with another coach who on a peer group, and what she said the other day, she always says a quote, and what she said the other day is, expert sailors are not born of smooth seas. And I can tell you that we are not in smooth seas right now, and so we are all going to be expert sailors in the long run. But the way you get through this is recognizing you are not alone, right? We just talked about your bank, right? Not only can they offer you bank loans or have specific discussions about what they can be doing for you if you already have a loan with them, they're also your conduit to the government programs. Your brokers, your real estate broker, your insurance broker, your financial broker, these are all people that are going to help you work through whether there's some sort of benefit for you somewhere. And then your support team, right? Your CPA, your consultant, your peer group, your coach. These are people where every single person on this list is here to support you. You are not in this alone. And there are avenues for you to be able to get the support that you need. And that's ultimately what we're doing here in this webinar, is being able to offer that support from a free perspective. And so I'm going to actually turn it back over to Grant and open it up for questions at this point.
Thanks, Becca.
Sure.
Great job.
And
so
you know
as
what,
Becca
I'm
mentioned,
actually, hang on, I'm going to put the cheat sheet up just so people can kind of look at that while we're talking about questions.
Yeah, feel free to, if you have any questions, use the Q&A button to submit those. We had a couple that were submitted ahead of time, so we'll go through those now. And then if you have any, feel free to add those. All right, the first one, Becca. Now that we are getting more used to working remotely, do you see physical workspaces as an area to cut costs?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think that's that financial analysis I was talking about in the beginning about where you expect to be in 6 months and whether or not you expect your workforce to remain remote. I think that the working remotely will change a lot of what an office looks like, but I also know that 50% of the people that are working from home right now wish they were in an office. So I think that's just the financial analysis you need to be doing.
Excellent, that makes sense. Another one, should I be looking at taking out loans to get me through this, or is that just racking up more debt? I know you mentioned some of the programs, but people that are scared of debt, what's your recommendation to them?
Well, I would tell you, and I'll pull the summary up. So again, talk to your banker about this specifically, but the several of the programs actually, if you use them for the purposes that they are defined for, you actually don't have to pay them back. So I would say, to answer your question, Grant, I would start with the programs that are out there. Do as much research as you can about what's out there as a support, and then determine your risk level and work with your partners to help you think through it.
Great, that makes sense. All right, here's another one. My employees are highly dependent on performance-based pay like bonuses or commission. What advice can I offer them to survive and recover after the pandemic, or what can we do to kind of boost morale in this time when sales are down?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, because this really gets to the question of who do you want to be and who do you want standing next to you. It's about retrenching in your values and how you value your employees, because the first thing that comes to my mind is when the question was what do I tell them to do in the end? The real question to me is, what are you doing as their employer to help them through right now? I do know of one company. My brother is a salesperson and he works on commissions, and his company is giving base commissions for the next 3 months, a base salary for the next 3 months, as opposed to commissions just to keep them where they need to be. So there's things that you can be doing as a business owner and as a leader within a company to help people through this at the same time.
That's great. That's an excellent point, and good to hear, and things that people need to evaluate, because like you said, what can employers do on their side? It's not all the onus isn't on the employee here. It's a lot on the owner too.
Right.
We had two additional questions. The next one, how do I know if I'm panicking and reacting too quickly by cutting costs in case I do get new customers, either in the interim or, like you said, in 2 to 3 months when things hopefully come back to normal business?
So I think if we go back to the scale of 1, 2, or 3, if when we went through that closed eyes process, you said, good Lord, Becca, I just need to figure out how I'm going to get through. I can't even think of 6 months from now. I would say you are in panic mode and you need to be able to turn back on the other part of your brain. I think that if you are not researching and you are not going through these questions and you're not tapping into the people that can support you, you may be panicking.
Great, great. And then the last one, how do you recommend approaching vendors, some of our vendors, and ask for delay in paying them?
Yeah, right. That's a tough thing to, it's a vulnerable place to be, and it's a tough question
Exactly.
to answer. Especially right now, I think there are so many programs out there, and there are so many things that seem normal now that wouldn't seem normal in everyday business. That if you're really uncomfortable, you could use words like, hey, I heard that other people might be doing this. Are you doing this? Or is that something you can help me with? Something that, you're just sort of throwing it out there in a roundabout way if you're really uncomfortable. If you are a little bit more comfortable, it really is, what can you do for me? Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, do we have any other questions? It doesn't look like so. So with that, we're going to conclude this one. Becca, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us and all of our listeners. It was great to have you on. Next up, I'll be presenting next Tuesday at 12 o'clock. So get your lunch ready, choosing the right project management software, and really choosing software in general, what's right for your business. So tune in next week and have a good rest of this week. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.